Welcome back to the Equipping ELLs Podcast. I am so glad you're here today because we're talking about something that can completely shift the way you plan lessons this school year. I want you to think about this. Every good road trip needs a GPS. Without it, you might get there eventually, but you're going to waste time. Take some wrong turns and feel pretty frustrated along the way. Anybody think back to those days of maps? What a game changer it was when we started getting GPS systems, right? The same is true for lesson planning. When you don't have a system to guide you, it's easy to feel like your lessons are just a mix of random activities, where you feel like every night you're thinking, okay, what should I be doing tomorrow? What can I do to fill this time? What do my students need that's best for them during this time that I have with them? How do I fit in everything into 2 30-minute blocks each week? There's so many decisions and questions that we ask ourselves. So this is why having a GPS in place helps you to know exactly where you're headed, how to get there, and what your students need to succeed. So today, I'm giving you a very simple framework. If you've been around here for any time, you know I like to pull it back, keep it simple, and then add on from there. So today I want to share with you 3 questions that you can ask yourself every single time you plan a lesson. I call it your GPS: goal, personalize, and scaffold. Let's dive in. The first question is, what's the goal of this lesson? This is where you zoom in on the essential skill or outcome. I've talked about this before, but using things like changing your content objectives into language objectives, that makes your goal very clear. What I see more often than not is us as teachers trying to fit in all the domains, all the content, all in a 30-minute lesson. And that's where we can get really lost and lose direction on what we're trying to have our students do, the goal we're trying to help them reach. And they also feel that too, of not sure where we're going with this lesson, what are we working on today, and coming away feeling unsure of really what was the purpose of your lesson. So starting with the G, the goal is really critical. It helps you stay focused, you stay aligned, and helps your students have a clear picture of what they should be working towards. So instead of trying to cover too much, focus on the one clear thing you want your students to walk away with. Maybe it's students will be able to use sequencing words to retell a story, or students will identify the main idea of a non-fiction passage. That doesn't mean you only are going to be focusing on that. The chunk of your lesson should be focused on that. Be very specific. I'm going to cover this domain, and this is my goal, and now this is how we're going to get there. But that's why I always talk about routines and setting up those routines that help you reach all the domains in that lesson. So let's say for a 30-minute lesson, if you're using your first 5 minutes as a speaking and writing warm-up, which I've talked about many times, if you haven't heard about that, let us know. We'll give you the insight into that. But using a quick and simple speaking and writing warm-up really warms up all the domains. So you're covering and developing those domains, but then you can move into the big priority of your lesson and really focus in on that specific goal. So like students will identify the main idea of a nonfiction passage. That's what we're going to spend the next 25 minutes on. That's where I'm going to keep this at the focus. I'm going to share this with my students so they know exactly what they are going to be focusing on. And then at the end, it helps them give that check-in. Were you able to accomplish this today? Do you understand what a nonfiction passage is? Do you understand what main idea is? Helps me also to guide if I need to do a follow-up lesson or if we need to extend this lesson. Or, you know what, they really got this. I think we can move on. The goal gives you direction. Without it, you risk doing fun activities that don't actually build toward anything. You're not building that foundation. And our students, especially our yellow students, really struggle when it's very standalone activities that are not building towards something. This is why I believe the newcomers curriculum that we have works so well, because it spirals, because it builds every single day. It's repeating activities, repeating vocabulary in different ways, and it's building on itself so that they see where they're headed each and every single week. So focus on that goal. What is the objective of your lesson? P is to personalize, okay? The second question I want you to ask yourself as you're sitting down the lesson plan, so what is my goal? Second question, how can I personalize this lesson for my students? This is where you connect the content in their lives, their cultures, their interests to what you are teaching. When students see themselves in the lesson, their motivation skyrockets. And you might be thinking, Beth, I have this many groups, I have this many students from this many backgrounds and this many languages. I cannot personalize every single lesson. But that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be using one student's name in a word problem. They see their name, they get excited. Especially those who are maybe losing engagement, right? Pull that in. Maybe it's choosing a passage about soccer for your soccer loving group, or AI, or robots, or anything. Taylor Swift, whoever it is, use something to personalize and make a connection to what your objective is. Maybe it's tying a science concept to something they're experiencing in their community or from their culture, from their home. Use what you know about your students, and it doesn't have to be for every single student. You're not personalizing it for everybody. But what happens is as you begin to pull in cultural things and personal things like their interest or their names or their language, even if that's not each student's identity, for them to see you doing that is going to help them to connect to what you're teaching. It's going to help them see that they matter to you and that your lessons, you want to bring that connection piece. So something that I would see before was homeroom teachers would be teaching something and then frustrated when their students wouldn't respond, when they wouldn't raise their hand and participate in conversation, when they didn't have anything to connect to it. And it made me stop and think, is what you're teaching bringing opportunities for our multilingual learners to connect to it? If we're teaching things through the lens of our experience and what we know, but it's not the experience of our students, how would they ever participate in conversations and have anything to add to that? But if we take just even a little bit of time to think about our lesson and think, is there a way I can personalize this and bring in a piece that is going to help engage my students, help bring connection to what their background, what they're familiar with, and ultimately that's going to help unlock the learning that you want them to do. So ask yourself this question: what's one small way I can help my students connect to this? And I promise the engagement and motivation is going to go up big time. So that's our second part of our GPS system. Remember, 3 questions to keep your lessons aligned this upcoming year. And then number 3 is, what scaffold will I use to make this lesson accessible? This is where we as ELL teachers shine. We know our students need supports, but the key is to choose one intentional scaffold for each lesson instead of trying to do them all at once. This is why having that very clear goal, knowing which domain that I'm focusing on in that lesson, helps me to create and use a scaffold that is going to best support that and also best support my students at the language level they're at. What we don't want is to over scaffold where they're really relying on us and it's becoming a crutch to their learning. It's stopping them from growth because we're giving them scaffolds that they do not need anymore. They're beyond that scaffold. We want to be purposeful in the planning of our scaffolds and choosing one scaffold that's going to support them at that language domain and at that goal that we're working on in that lesson. So maybe it is sentence stems. Maybe it's a graphic organizer. Maybe it's visuals or a chance to practice with a partner first. The scaffold is what ensures every student can engage with the lesson and not just sit quietly on the sidelines. Now, if scaffolding is something that is new to you or you just want a little bit of a refresher, we have a free scaffolding guide that we can share with you where we take the 3 most common scaffolds, which are visual pictures, word banks, and sentence stems, and we break them down on how to use those for each of the language levels. You might be working with a level 4 student. That doesn't mean that you have to get rid of visuals altogether, but you're going to use them in a different way than you would for your level 1 student. The same with word banks, the same with sentence stems. So we walk you through how to use those practically and intentionally at each of the language levels. So you could just focus on one scaffold. I'm going to be working on word banks and I'm going to use those for all the different levels, but I'm going to make sure that I'm giving them the scaffold in the way that best supports their language levels. And we've been talking a lot about language levels, how to identify them. So you can go back to a few of the last episodes and listen in on those conversations of how to best focus on the language levels, identify them, assess them, all that good stuff. Following this GPS is going to help you make the most of your time with your ELL students. You're not going to get lost in the weeds. You're not going to be throwing things together. You're not going to be using fillers because you're going to be very clear about the goal that you are focusing on during that lesson. You're going to be very clear about how you can even find one small way to personalize it to your group, to your class. And you're going to be very clear on the scaffold you're going to use to support to make sure that there is no hindrance in them understanding the lesson that you're teaching. So let's take just a minute to put this into action. Okay. I want to give you an example because sometimes that personalized piece can think, how do I really do this? If we're trying to have our students identify the main idea of a nonfiction passage, maybe we're learning about recycling. Okay. And so you're sitting there and thinking, how can I relate recycling to my students? I don't know what recycling looked like in their home country. I don't know what they know about recycling. Well, you could spend some time to ask them, right? Or you can teach the concept in something that connects with them and tying it to their culture. We're focusing on our objective. Our goal is to identify the main idea of a nonfiction passage. So before we get to the one that is what we need to be covering, which is recycling, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to connect to their culture, learn more about them, and help them to see what it is, a main idea in something that they're connected to. So I might use food, for example, right? People love to talk about food, share about food. It's a very personal connection. So before reading about recycling, I'm going to start with reading a passage about tortillas or rice or another staple food that most of your students probably have had before. And we're going to break this down. Maybe I'm going to do a sort of, what's the main idea? What's a detail to that? Maybe I use different cultural foods or maybe brainstorm together, or maybe I give them some ideas. So I might say tortillas are an important food in many cultures. Okay, right away, those students who have had tortillas at home, maybe they've made tortillas with their abuela, they're going to instantly go, oh, tortillas, I love tortillas. And they're going to be interested in your lesson, okay? Today, we're going to read about recycling. And there might just be crickets, or they might just space out already. So use that personalized touch, tie them in. We're talking about tortillas, okay? So let's talk about some details about tortillas. They can be used for tacos, quesadillas, burritos. We use water and flour to make them at home. I prefer corn tortillas. Just whatever types of details, you're getting them speaking, which is important with our ELLs. You're getting them coming up with ideas. They're now can be able to identify the main idea and the details. Maybe they come up with all the details and you work together to come up with the main idea. Do you see how you're teaching the concept, but in a way that's related to their culture? Okay. So then you can say, just like we figured out the main idea and details about tortillas, today, we'll do the same with a passage about recycling. So it's already giving them this framework to understand as they go into the content that they need to learn. You would then also think in what kind of scaffolds do I need? Maybe you're going to preview vocabulary again and then model finding the main idea just like we did with tortillas. Maybe you're going to do an additional one before you jump into the content. Maybe you're going to give them a graphic organizer. Maybe you're going to give them some sentence frames. Again, it depends on your language level. But do you see how this GPS can really keep you focused and maximizing the time you have with your students to make sure that you are really being specific and intentional in how you're supporting them in their language growth? This is where language growth happens. Now, let's look at a plan for a unit, a GPS plan for a unit. Okay. So that's one lesson, but how can I use it for a whole unit? Here's how it works. Your goal is that going to be starting with your end goal. Okay. So what is the essential academic skill or big idea for this unit? Maybe it's a 5-day unit. Maybe it's a 10-day unit, but I find it's easier to plan 5 or 10 days over individual lessons every day. This is where you can really create opportunities for that growth, for them to build on their skills and it not just be standalone. So it might be, a goal like students will explain how plants and animals depend on each other to survive. Now you're going to break that into smaller weekly lesson goals, like, highlighting the vocabulary. Maybe you're going to focus on cause and effect. You're going to focus on explanations. You're going to use pull in the WIDA here and really define what each day looks like. Now, to personalize it, you can think of 2 to 3 ways to connect this unit to students' backgrounds. I would start every single new unit with some way that you're going to connect to the students and build off what they know. If ecosystems, maybe you're working with newcomers or level 2 students, if ecosystems feel abstract, then start with something like their schoolyard or their neighborhood and talking about what plants, insects, or animals they notice. Maybe providing some pictures and they do a sort. Maybe you bring in some videos that help to highlight it and that you let them listen to it in their native language first. These are all different ways you can build that background. And then you want to keep layering in the connections, comparing a rainforest ecosystem to their own surroundings. Or you can tie in cultural stories about animals and nature, maybe finding a folktale about animals from their culture that you can share and bring in a literacy piece to it. So it doesn't have to be every single day that you're making sure you're adding in their name or bringing in a cultural piece, but it's more of the overview. How are you connecting to what they already know and building on that? And then the S is just deciding on what types of scaffolds you'll rotate across the unit. Early on in the unit, you may scaffold heavily like word banks, visuals, and then throughout the unit, you might pull some of those back and have them start to do some things without those scaffolds. The beauty of GPS at the unit level is that it keeps your instruction aligned, connected, and accessible from start to finish. Instead of scattered lessons, you're building toward one clear goal, and you can then hit on all the domains, all the content that you need to cover in a very intentional and meaningful way. I hope you can see how simple this is. With GPS, you're not scrambling to reinvent the wheel. You're focusing your planning with 3 quick questions. What's the essential takeaway? How can I make it meaningful for my students? And what support will help every student access it? If you run every lesson and every unit through the simple GPS, I promise you, you will keep your teaching aligned and purposeful all year long. And here's the best part. You don't need hours of planning to do it. Okay, just write these questions down, come back to them, and you can keep it simple as you move forward. I want you to try this out this week. Before your next lesson or even before your next unit, pause and run it through these GPS questions. And if you'd like ready to use lessons and units that already follow this framework, you'll find them inside the Equipping ELLs membership. We really have done the heavy lifting for you. We've really made sure that we have clear goals. We have overall unit goals. We have daily lesson plan goals, language objectives, content objectives already done for you. We've scaffolded it out. We've made sure that there is a cultural connection, that there is a personalized piece for your multilingual learners because it's been created with multilingual learners in mind. We have done that for you. If you want that access right now, you can join us inside the membership and use the code EQUIP20 to take 20% off the Tier 3 yearly price. This brings the price down to just over 60 cents per day. For all the curriculum, coaching, and community you need to support your ELLs successfully this year. So this can all be done for you. You then literally just have to print and teach, and you're going to keep making sure that your lessons are aligned to what your students need because it's already been done for you. Come join us inside Equipping ELLs with the coupon code EQUIP20 for Tier 3 yearly price. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want the scaffolds, send us a DM on Instagram with the word scaffolds, and we will get that over to you right away. It's a game changer. If you're new to scaffolding or starting to work with ELLs, this will be where you want to begin when you're adding in those supports and scaffolds by language level. Thank you for tuning in today. And remember, every good journey needs a GPS. And with this one, you and your students are going to stay on the right path all year long. I'll see you next week.